It was a whisper in the dark, a desperate plea not meant for any ears but her own. "I need someone to marry me tonight." But in that hushed moment, the most powerful man in the room heard every word. This is not just a love story. It's a deep dive into the dangerous, alluring, and psychologically complex world where ultimate power meets absolute vulnerability. On one side, a woman with no options, trapped by circumstance and class. On the other, a man defined by control, wealth, and absolute authority. Their worlds were never meant to intersect, but in that single whispered sentence, a chain reaction began. This is the anatomy of a modern fairy tale, dissecting the magnetic pull, the profound risk, and the real human cost when the ultimate power imbalance becomes the foundation for a relationship. What happens after the fantasy collides with reality? What happens after the fantasy collides with reality? Let's rewind to the beginning of that night. The setting is the pinnacle of opulence, the annual charity gala at the Vanderbilt Hotel, where a single glass of champagne costs more than the hourly wage of every serving staff member combined. Among them is Elena Mendez, 28 years old, an undocumented immigrant carrying the weight of her family's survival on her shoulders. Her mother's medical bills, her younger brother's tuition, a debt to a coyote that grows more threatening with each passing week. The gala is just another shift, another night of being invisible until it isn't. On the other side of the ballroom is Alexander Thorne, 42, CEO of Thorne Global Holdings, a man whose decisions move markets and whose silence can end careers. To the world, he is the embodiment of success. But in the quiet moments, he is acutely aware of the fortress his wealth has built around him, a gilded cage of transactional relationships and profound isolation. The whisper happens during the silent auction. Elena is clearing a table, her body aching from 14 hours on her feet, when her phone buzzes with a message from her cousin. The news is catastrophic. Her mother's condition has worsened. The hospital is demanding immediate payment. The coyote has given a final, violent ultimatum. The walls of her world, already paper-thin, collapse in an instant. The words escape her lips not as a calculated ploy, but as a raw, unfiltered fracture of her soul. "Dios mío, necesito que alguien se case conmigo esta noche." My God, I need someone to marry me tonight. She doesn't see Alexander Thorne standing 3 feet away, partially concealed by a decorative column, having stepped away from a tiresome conversation. He hears the desperation, the tremor of genuine fear beneath the Spanish words he perfectly understands. And in that split second, a man who analyzes risk for a living makes the most impulsive decision of his life. He doesn't approach her then, he watches. He observes the way she composes herself, the way she seamlessly slips back into her role, a masterclass in survival. It fascinates him. An hour later, as the gala winds down, he finds her supervisor. A discreet inquiry, a transferred sum that covers the administrative fee for reassigning a staff member, and Elena Mendez is quietly instructed to report to the penthouse suite to attend to a last-minute request from the guest of honor. This is where the trope begins, the powerful man summoning the vulnerable woman to private space. But the psychology is more complex than simple attraction. According to Dr. Anya Petrov, a sociologist who studies elite behavior, for ultra-high net worth individuals, genuine emotion is a scarce commodity. Witnessing raw, unfiltered vulnerability can be intoxicating. It feels real in a world of performance. The desire to control that vulnerability, to own that authenticity, is often misinterpreted as romance. Elena enters the penthouse, expecting to clean up after a party. Instead, she finds Alexander Thorne alone, standing at the floor-to-ceiling window. He turns and delivers a line that exists only in fiction and yet forms the bedrock of this fantasy. "I overheard your situation. I can solve your problem, but I require something in return." His proposal is as cold as it is simple, a marriage of convenience, 1 year. In return, he will clear all her debts, secure her family's safety, and grant her legal status. For him, it's a strategic solution to his own problem, a board of directors and old money family pressuring him to settle down, to present a stable, conventional image as the company plans a massive, sensitive public offering. A real relationship is a liability. A contracted arrangement is clean. For Elena, it's not a choice. It's salvation with a price tag she cannot yet comprehend. She signs the contract he has already had drafted by his lawyer, her hand shaking as she trades her autonomy for her family's survival. The fairy tale, in its most transactional form, is initiated. But here is the first crucial twist that most stories gloss over. The immediate aftermath is not a montage of glamour. It is a brutal crash course in power dynamics. Elena is moved from her shared apartment in Queens to a private wing of Alexander's Manhattan penthouse. She is given a new wardrobe, a new phone, a new schedule dictated by his assistant. She is, in every practical sense, purchased. Her debt is not erased. It is transferred to a new, far more formidable creditor. The psychological impact is immediate. Studies on power imbalance in relationships show that the subordinate partner often experiences a rapid decline in self-esteem, developing what psychologists call learned helplessness. Every decision, from what she wears to what she eats, is subject to approval. The mansion is not a home. It is the physical manifestation of the power differential. She is drowning in luxury, and it feels like quicksand. Meanwhile, Alexander begins the performance. The society pages run a whirlwind romance story, the reclusive billionaire and the beautiful, mysterious immigrant. But behind closed doors, the rules are clear. They are roommates in a business deal. He is courteous, distant, and meticulously in control. Until the night of the first public event as a couple, a museum opening. Elena, dressed in a gown worth more than her former yearly salary, is paralyzed by anxiety. The stares, the whispers, the subtle racism of high society. She feels like an imposter in a museum of her own life, and in a moment of panic, she retreats to a balcony. Alexander finds her there, not with anger, but with an observation that cracks his own facade. "You look at them like they're monsters," he says, "but they're just ghosts, haunted by their own money. You're more real than any of them." It's the first time he speaks to her not as an asset, but as a person. It's the moment the carefully constructed wall between them develops its first fissure. And that fissure creates a dangerous opportunity, because the greatest threat to a contract built on cold logic is the unpredictable spark of genuine connection. 1 week later, during a mandated date for the paparazzi at a quiet restaurant, Elena asks him a question no one has dared to ask in years. "What's the one thing you wanted to be before you became this?" He is silent for a full minute. The answer, when it comes, changes everything. A pianist. The admission is so soft, so at odds with the titan of industry, that it dismantles the entire dynamic. That night, for the first time, he doesn't retreat to his study. He sits at the grand piano in the living room, a relic from a childhood he never discusses, and plays a piece by Chopin. Elena listens from the hallway, unseen, and in that moment, the prisoner sees the warden is in a cage of his own making. The power balance, for an instant, subtly shifts. She holds a piece of his truth. This is the turning point. This is when the business deal becomes perilously, irrevocably human. But the outside world doesn't stop. Alexander's board grows suspicious of his quick marriage. A ruthless rival CEO begins digging into Elena's past, and the coyote she thought she left behind, he has just seen her photograph in the society section of the newspaper. He now knows exactly where to find her, and he understands her new husband's net worth down to the last decimal. The fantasy is about to be invaded by a very brutal, very real, and very dangerous past. The fantasy is invaded not with a knock, but with a photograph. A grainy image taken through a long lens, sent to Elena's new phone from an unknown number. It shows her mother sitting on the front step of their family home in Queens, unaware she is being watched. The message is simple. "Congratulations on your new life, Hermana. My fee just went up, 500,000, or I have a conversation with your gringo husband about where you really came from." The cage of luxury becomes a prison of panic. Elena's first instinct is to run, but running is no longer an option. She is now a public figure, her face tied to Alexander Thorne's empire. Her vulnerability is no longer just personal, it is a corporate liability. This is the first major escalation, when a personal threat evolves into a professional crisis. She makes a critical decision. Instead of hiding the threat, she takes it to Alexander. This act itself is a seismic shift in their dynamic. She is not coming to him as a subordinate asking for help. She is presenting a problem that now belongs to both of them. The coyote is no longer just her creditor, he is a threat to the Thorne brand. Alexander's reaction is not one of anger toward her, but of cold, calculated analysis. He sees the extortion attempt for what it is, a test of his domain. "You don't negotiate with terrorists," he tells her, his voice devoid of the chilling warmth from the piano. "You eliminate them." He instructs his head of security, a former intelligence officer, to manage the situation. The euphemism hangs in the air, heavy with implication. Elena is not told the details. She is simply assured it will be handled. The power she briefly glimpsed in his vulnerability is now fully deployed as a weapon, and she is both protected and sidelined by it. While this private threat is being managed, the public pressure cooker reaches its boiling point. Alexander's rival, Carter Blakely, CEO of a competing tech conglomerate, makes his move. He doesn't attack Alexander directly. He launches a whisper campaign through pliable media outlets. The narrative is subtle, insidious. Questions about the speed of the marriage, pointed remarks about due diligence, and hints that Thorn Global's impending public offering might be riskier than investors think. The subtext is clear. Alexander Thorn is emotionally compromised. The board of Thorn Global summons Alexander. The meeting is not in the sleek boardroom, but in the private club where old money shareholders hold their real power. The demand is presented as concern. "We need transparency, Alex. This, rapid personal development, it introduces variables. The market hates variables." They propose a validation strategy. Elena must undergo a series of public integrations. A primetime interview, a co-hosted charity event, a documented visit to the family estate in Connecticut. She must perform the perfect wife, and she must do it flawlessly under media scrutiny to prove she is not a liability. Alexander agrees, not because he believes in the performance, but because he understands the language of power. He returns to the penthouse and lays out the plan to Elena. It is not a request, it is a new set of contractual obligations. The piano-playing man is gone, replaced once more by the CEO. The fissure between them seems to seal shut under the pressure. Here is where the documentary dissects the real mechanism of control in such an imbalance. It is rarely overt cruelty. It is the constant, grinding pressure to conform, to be grateful, to justify your place. Elena is assigned a coach, a former diplomat's wife, to drill her on etiquette, current events, and the correct way to discuss her whirlwind romance. Her every word is scripted. Her past is rewritten into a palatable fiction, a hard-working student from a humble, loving family. The coyote, her mother's illness, the desperation, all erased. The night before the pivotal television interview, Elena breaks. She confronts Alexander in his study. "You're asking me to lie about everything I am," she says, her voice trembling not with fear now, but with a furious, quiet energy. "You bought my silence, but you don't get to rewrite my life." Alexander looks up from his contracts, and for a second she sees not calculation, but exhaustion. "You think I'm not lying?" he replies, his voice low. "Every word I say to those vultures is a performance. This whole life is a performance. The only difference is I built this stage, you were pushed onto it." In that moment, they are not CEO and contracted wife. They are two actors in a play neither of them entirely chose, recognizing each other in the wings. It is a connection born not of romance, but of shared duplicity, and in a way that is more intimate and more dangerous. The interview is a masterpiece of fiction. Elena is radiant, poised, telling the story of meeting Alexander at the charity gala, of a connection that transcended words. She speaks of her admiration for his work, her love for her new city. She is believable because she is channeling a very real survival instinct. The public and the board are appeased. The stock ticker for Thorn Global ticks upward. But in the green room afterward, as Alexander's publicist celebrates, Elena slips away. She finds a janitor's closet and cries, not from sadness, but from the sheer psychological whiplash of holding two completely realities in her head. This is the documented cost of imposter syndrome, magnified 1,000-fold in a gilded cage. The self fractures. Returning home, a new kind of silence settles between them. It is not the silence of distance, but of mutual, unspoken recognition. They share a secret now, the truth of their fabrication, and shared secrets build a perverse kinship. This fragile, tense equilibrium is shattered by a delivery. A plain envelope, hand-delivered by a courier, addressed to Alexander. Inside are photographs, not of Elena's mother, but of Alexander. leaving a nondescript apartment building in the early hours of the morning, 3 days before the gala where he met Elena. The building is identified in a typed note, the home of his company's lead counsel, who is also secretly the executor of a trust fund for a child, a 7-year-old boy named Leo. The note from Carter Blakely is succinct. Every empire has its heir, Alex, and every heir has a mother. What's the going rate for that silence these days? The revelation is a narrative earthquake. Alexander Thorne did not enter a marriage of convenience simply to placate his board. He entered it to conceal a far deeper, more vulnerable secret. A child from a past relationship, a child whose existence could destabilize inheritance plans, family expectations, and his carefully controlled image in ways a quick marriage to a stranger never could. His proposal to Elena wasn't just a solution, it was camouflage. He is not the powerful savior in this story. He is a man running from a different kind of threat, using Elena's desperation to build a fortress around his own. The power imbalance just inverted. Elena held a piece of his authentic self, the pianist. Now, she inadvertently holds the key to his greatest vulnerability. Alexander confesses that night, not out of nobility, but because Blakely's blackmail means the information is already in play. He tells Elena about Leo, about the boy's mother, a journalist he met years ago who wanted no part of his world, but who accepted support for their son. The board, my family, they would see him as a threat, a variable. They would try to control him, to control her. This marriage was a wall to keep that part of my life safe. Elena listens, the pieces falling into a horrifying new picture. She was not recruited to play a wife. She was recruited to play a distraction. The humiliation is profound, but it is quickly eclipsed by a dawning, terrifying understanding. Their fates are now doubly, irrevocably linked. If Alexander falls, if Blakely exposes the child, the scandal would destroy Thorne Global. Her legal status, her family's safety, all of it is tied to the company's stability. She has no safe exit. This is the major pivot. The story is no longer about a powerful man saving a vulnerable woman. It is about two vulnerable people, each hiding a catastrophic secret, trapped in a mutually assured destruction pact, pretending to be an invincible power couple. The fairy tale is dead. What remains is a thriller. And the coyote, he was never handled. He was paid off by Alexander's security chief, yes, but men like him don't disappear. They become silent partners. He now knows a single powerful fact. Alexander Thorne was willing to pay a significant sum to make a problem go away. In the shadow economy of information, that makes Alexander not a threat, but a resource. The coyote's silence becomes a permanent, ticking invoice. The pressure fractures them in a new direction. Instead of pulling apart, the shared danger forces a tactical alliance. They begin to strategize not as CEO and subordinate, but as co-conspirators. Elena uses her intelligence, her eye for detail that served her in survival, to analyze Blakely's moves. Alexander, in turn, starts to listen. The dynamic shifts from vertical to something almost horizontal, a partnership forged in the bunker. They decide their only move is a counterattack, to undermine Blakely's credibility before he can fire his weapon. This means digging into Blakely's own life, a dangerous game of corporate espionage. Alexander's resources provide the tools, but Elena suggests the angle. He's attacking your family, she says, the word family hanging between them, encompassing both Leo and their own bizarre union. Find his. This leads Alexander's investigators to a hidden truth. Carter Blakely has a sister, institutionalized for years under a different name, the cost of her care quietly funneled through offshore accounts. A sister he has publicly denied for decades, a vulnerability of his own. Armed with this, Alexander requests a private meeting with Blakely, not in an office, but on a private golf course. The conversation is a masterpiece of unspoken threat. Alexander doesn't mention Leo. He doesn't mention the sister. He simply says, "It seems we've both built our lives on certain architectures, Carter. Very impressive. But you know as well as I do, the most beautiful architecture often has the most critical stress points, unseen to the naked eye. It would be a tragedy if something caused a foundational crack in either of our designs." The message is received. A tense, silent standoff ensues. The public attacks from Blakely's media allies cease. The immediate threat is neutralized. In the penthouse that night, Alexander and Elena share a drink, not in celebration, but in exhausted acknowledgement. They have won a battle, not the war. They have also crossed a moral line together, weaponizing a vulnerable woman's private struggle as ammunition. The stain is on both their hands. And in this precarious calm, the most dangerous development of all occurs. Genuine feeling begins to grow in the soil of shared conspiracy. It is not the clean romance of the fairy tale. It is something darker, more complex, and infinitely more binding. A touch that lingers as a strategy is discussed. A glance that holds a fraction of a second too long. The realization that the person who knows the worst of you and has fought alongside you anyway is someone you cannot live without. But just as this new, real connection tentatively sparks, a certified letter arrives from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Their marriage is flagged for a random, in-depth interview to assess its validity. It is scheduled for 3 weeks' time. A routine procedure, the letter says. Alexander's head of security runs a trace on the request. It did not come from a random audit. The request was triggered by a specific, external inquiry. The source is a law firm retained by none other than Elena Thorne, Alexander's own mother. The final, most intimate front in the war has just opened. The family matriarch has decided to test the foundation of her son's convenient marriage herself, and she will be watching. Elena Thorne is not a villain from central casting. She is something far more dangerous, a pragmatic institutionalist. The widow of Alexander's father, she didn't inherit the company. She preserved it through the tumultuous years after his death, steering it with a glacial will. She views the corporation not as a vehicle for wealth, but as a legacy, an organism that must be protected from all infection, including the emotional failings of its heir. Her inquiry to immigration isn't about malice toward Elena. It is a quality control check. Alexander receives the news of the triggered interview with cold fury. His relationship with his mother is a decades-long chess game of respect and resentment. She knows, he tells Elena, packing the length of his study. She might not know about Leo, but she knows this marriage is a strategic move. She's testing the seam to see if it holds. The preparation for the immigration interview becomes their new, all-consuming project. But this isn't coaching for a television appearance. This is a forensic examination. They must memorize a shared history in minute, intimate detail, the pattern on the china at their first breakfast, the song playing in the car on their third date, the brand of toothpaste they allegedly both prefer. A wrong answer isn't a public embarrassment. It is potential felony, fraud, and Elena's deportation. The psychological toll is documented in studies of couples in sham marriages for immigration purposes. The constant reinforcement of a false narrative can lead to a dissociative state, where individuals struggle to separate the fiction from their own memories. Elena finds herself dreaming in the details of her fabricated life. She wakes up unsure, for a moment, if she actually likes the lavender-scented candles they claimed she bought for his birthday. During one brutal drill session, Elena snaps. "What was the first thing you said to me that wasn't in the script?" she demands, throwing the binder of fabricated timelines onto the floor. "What is one true thing about us, Alexander? Just one." He is silent for a long time. Then he says, "The piano, that was true, and the fact that you heard it." It's a small admission, but in the landscape of their lies, it feels like a mountain. They are no longer building a fiction from nothing. They are weaving truth into the lie, and that changes everything. The connection they've forged in the bunker becomes the foundational beam of their story. It is real enough to pass the test, but recognizing its reality terrifies them both. 3 days before the interview, the external world breaches the gates again. The coyote, emboldened by his successful first extortion, makes his second move. He doesn't ask for money, he asks for a job, a consulting role at a Thorne Global warehouse with a generous salary and no actual duties. It's a classic move from the predator's playbook, transitioning from a one-time target to a permanent parasite on the host. He is institutionalizing his leverage. Alexander's security chief advises paying him off again, making him a permanent, quiet line item. But Elena disagrees. She understands the man's psychology from the inside. He will always come back for more. He smells weakness. You give him a job, he'll want a promotion. You give him silence money, he'll sell the silence to someone else. You have to change the game. She proposes a counteroffer so audacious it stuns Alexander. They will give the coyote, whose name is Matteo, a legitimate, demanding job overseas. A position managing a new supply line logistics hub in Singapore, far from his networks, surrounded by corporate oversight. It's a promotion wrapped in exile. They will turn his greed against him, offering him a taste of the legitimate world he could never access, with the implicit threat that one misstep will send him crashing down from a much greater height. Alexander executes the plan. Matteo is flattered, suspicious, but ultimately seduced by the title, the salary, the suit. He accepts. The immediate threat is neutralized, not by violence, but by a more potent weapon, aspiration. Elena's insight proves critically valuable, not as a victim, but as a strategist. Her value in Alexander's eyes shifts another decisive degree. Night before the immigration interview, Elena Thorne invites herself to dinner. It is an ambush in silk and pearls. The meal is a silent, agonizing performance. Elena observes everything, how they pass the salt, how they avoid each other's gaze, how they don't touch. She asks polite, devastating questions. Elena, darling, Alexander tells me you enjoy art. What did you think of the Basquiat at the Met Gala? A gala Elena never attended, according to their backstory. It's a trap. Elena, instead of panicking, meets Elena's eyes. I'm afraid Alexander misspoke, she says, her voice steady. We discussed the Basquiat, but I've never seen it in person. I told him my favorite piece in that wing is actually the Hopper. Automat, the loneliness of it, he must have gotten confused. It's a flawless, graceful parry. She doesn't stick to the script. She improves it, demonstrating a shared intimacy of conversation, not just shared attendance. Alexander, playing along, smiles apologetically. You're right, my mistake, the Hopper. In that moment, they are not lying. They are collaboratively writing a new, better truth. Elena leaves, her expression unreadable. But the message is clear. The scrutiny will be relentless. The immigration interview is a sterile, windowless room with two officers. The questions are dry, procedural, and deeply invasive. Describe the layout of your spouse's bathroom. What side of the bed does he sleep on? What was the topic of your first argument as a married couple? They answer in unison, their stories matching perfectly, the product of endless drilling. But when the officer, a weary-looking woman, asks, "What is the quality you most admire in each other?" the script falls away. Elena answers first. His honesty. The word hangs in the air, a beautiful, ironic lie that is also profoundly true about their pact of shared secrets, even when it's difficult. Alexander looks at her, and for the first time in a public setting, his CEO mask slips completely. He looks shaken. He takes a second too long to answer. Her resilience, he finally says, his voice softer than the officers have heard. She remakes the world around her to survive. I've never seen anything like it. It is not the answer from the binder. It is the truth. The officer looks between them, her bureaucratic demeanor giving way to a flicker of human recognition. She stamps the paperwork. Congratulations, your petition is recommended for approval. The victory is overwhelming, but it tastes strange. They won by telling the most real lie possible. In the car ride home, the silence is electric. The shared ordeal has bonded them in a way that feels irreversible. That night, for the first time, they share a bed not as a performance for staff or photographers, but by unspoken mutual agreement. The marriage of convenience consummates not out of obligation, but out of a raw, complicated, battle-forged need. The line between performance and reality is obliterated. But just as they grasp this new, real connection, the third and most devastating attack lands. It does not come from Blakely or the Coyote or immigration. It comes from a source they never thought to guard, Leo's mother, Claire. She sends a formal letter from her lawyer to Alexander. She has learned of his marriage through the media blitz. The letter states that this sudden, public union creates an unstable environment for their son. She fears the scrutiny, the chaos of a potential scandal if the marriage is revealed as a sham. She is therefore petitioning for full custody and a restructuring of the trust fund to be placed entirely under her control, removing Alexander's access. She isn't motivated by greed, but by a mother's fear, and she is utterly, morally justified. Alexander's strategy to protect his son has backfired catastrophically, putting the boy directly in the crossfire. The wall he built has become a prison for the very person he meant to protect. This is the "it gets worse" moment. The internal contradiction of their arrangement explodes. You cannot build a fortress of lies to protect something real without the lies eventually threatening the foundation. Alexander is shattered. The one truly good, untainted part of his life is now in jeopardy because of his deal with Elena. Elena witnesses his devastation, and instead of feeling threatened, she feels a surge of protective fury. Claire is not an enemy, she is an ally they failed to bring into the fold. You tried to build a wall around them, Elena tells Alexander, who sits slumped in his chair. You should have built a gate and given her the key. She proposes the unthinkable, full transparency. They must go to Claire together and tell her the entire truth. The contract, the threats, the immigration interview, everything. They must ask for her partnership, not her silence. It is a monumental risk. Claire could go public with the story out of anger, destroying everything. But the alternative, a legal battle that would drag Leo into the open, is worse. They fly to Claire's home in Portland. The meeting is tense, painful. Alexander confesses his poor strategy. Elena speaks not as his wife, but as someone who understands desperate choices for family. She shows Claire the photo of her own mother, the coyote's threats. He was trying to protect Leo the only way a man like him knows how, Elena says, by controlling everything. It was the wrong way, but the intention was love. Claire, a journalist, sees the story for what it is, a tragic, messy human drama. She agrees to a truce, no custody battle. In return, Alexander signs over a larger portion of the trust to her direct control and agrees to regular, unfettered access to Leo without secrecy. The wall comes down, replaced by an awkward, honest arrangement. On the flight back to New York, Alexander looks at Elena as if seeing her for the first time. You saved him, he says, the words heavy with emotion. You saved my son. Elena replies, we did. The we is definitive. They return home, believing the storm has finally passed. They have neutralized Blakely, exiled the coyote, passed the immigration test, and secured peace with Claire. The forces that drove them together, threat and necessity, are fading. What remains is the complex, real relationship that grew in the dark. And that is precisely when the final, most subtle trap springs. At a minor corporate event, a junior analyst approaches Elena. He is starstruck, bumbling. Mrs. Thorne, I just have to say, your story is so inspiring. It's like a fairy tale. Elena offers her practiced, gracious smile, but the word fairy tale now feels like a slap. Later, she stares at her reflection in the penthouse window. She is wearing a $50,000 dress. She lives in a $90 million apartment. She has security, status, and a husband who looks at her with genuine love. She has won by every metric of the fantasy. So why does she feel like she's disappearing? The answer is the psychological core of the entire experiment. In surviving, in adapting, in becoming the perfect co-conspirator, and then the real wife, Elena Mendez has been systematically erased. Her tastes have been curated, her past rewritten, her instincts channeled into corporate strategy. The resilient survivor Alexander admired is being smoothed into the polished figure of Elena Thorne. She has gained the world and is losing herself. She realizes a terrifying truth. The most complete form of control is not oppression, it is assimilation. The power imbalance did not disappear when they fell in love. It evolved. He absorbed her crisis into his world, and now his world is absorbing her. This internal crisis coincides with the one-year anniversary of their contract, the date it was meant to terminate. Alexander does not mention it. He has clearly assumed the arrangement is now permanent, real. But for Elena, the contractual end date is a lifeline she didn't know she was clinging to. It represents a choice, not an inevitability. She must now decide, does she stay in this gilded life as a transformed version of herself, loved but fundamentally altered? Or does she reclaim the messy, dangerous, authentic self she was forced to abandon, knowing it could destroy the real love she has found in the process? The war with the outside world is over. The war within has just begun, and its battlefield is her own soul. The fairy tale's happy ending was only the prelude to the hardest choice of all. The war within begins not with a declaration, but with a single, silent realization. Elena stands at the threshold of the life she was desperate to enter, and for the first time, she understands the cost of admission was herself. The one-year anniversary of their contract passes unmentioned, but its ghost haunts every room. She has everything she fought for: safety, stability, love, and yet she is grieving. This is the documented psychological paradox of achieving escape velocity from poverty and trauma. The survivor's guilt, the disorientation of safety, the lingering fear that it can all be taken away, these don't vanish when the bank balance changes. They mutate. Elena isn't afraid of losing money, she's afraid of losing the person who earned that survival. She makes a decision, but not the one the fairy tale expects. She doesn't pack a bag in the night. She doesn't stage a dramatic confrontation. She begins quietly to rebuild Elena Mendez from the fragments left behind. She reaches out to a community immigration center, not for help, but to volunteer. She uses her newfound Spanish, not the polished Castilian of her coached persona, but the rapid-fire, slang-filled dialect of her neighborhood. It is an act of reclamation. Alexander notices the shift. He senses a distance, but misinterprets it as unhappiness with him. His response is telling. He tries to solve it. He plans a lavish vacation, proposes buying her a gallery to curate, offers anything she might want. He is speaking the only language of care he has ever known, transactional remediation. It misses the point entirely, and the gap between them widens. The breaking point comes at a dinner with Elena Thorne. Elena, having observed the immigration interview and the subsequent stability, has begun to thaw. She speaks of legacy, of family traditions, of Elena's future role in the Thorne Philanthropic Foundation. She is, in her own way, offering acceptance, but every word feels like a blueprint for Elena's final assimilation. She is being offered a permanent, honored role in the cage. After the dinner, Elena can't sleep. She goes to Alexander's study, where he is working late. "I need to talk about the contract," she says. The word, unspoken for months, hangs between them like a guillotine. Alexander's face goes pale. He thinks this is the end. He begins to speak, to argue, to list everything they've built, but Elena interrupts. "I don't want to terminate it," she says. "I want to renegotiate it." She lays out her terms, not as demands, but as the foundation for a real marriage. First, she will move out of the penthouse. She will rent her own apartment with her own money, earned from a job she finds herself. Second, they will date, publicly, privately, like any other couple, without the script. Third, she will have her own life, her own friends, her own causes, independent of the Thorne brand. And fourth, and most importantly, they will go to couples therapy to untangle the web of power, trauma, and transaction they started in. "I love you, Alexander," she says, her voice unwavering, "but I can't love you as your employee, or your client, or your rescued damsel. I can only love you as your equal, and right now we are not equals. I need us to build that from the ground up." Alexander is silent, stunned. Every instinct as a CEO screams against ceding control, against introducing unpredictable variables. But the man who played Chopin in the dark, the father who feared for his son, recognizes this not as an attack, but as the only path to salvation. He sees, finally, that the woman he loves is dying in the life he gave her, and the only way to save her is to let her go, to trust her to come back. He agrees. The fallout is immediate and brutal. Elena moves to a modest one-bedroom in Brooklyn. She gets a job not in the art world or high society, but as a coordinator at the same immigration center where she volunteers. Her salary is a fraction of her former allowance. She rides the subway. She cooks her own meals. To the outside world, it looks like a separation, a scandal in the making. The board gets nervous. The gossip columns buzz. But behind closed doors, a different story unfolds. Alexander, true to his word, courts her. He takes the subway to Brooklyn, brings flowers that wilt on the train, eats takeout on her floor. They have terrible, honest fights about money, about time, about fear. They go to therapy, where they unpack the toxic foundation of their relationship. It is messy, painful, and real. Elena Thorne is baffled, then furious, then reluctantly intrigued. She summons Alexander. "You're risking everything for what? A middle-class fantasy?" Alexander's reply is simple. "I'm risking everything for the only real thing I've ever had." Meanwhile, Elena's work at the center leads her to a discovery. She notices patterns in the cases, specific employers, specific loan structures that mirror her own experience with the Coyote network, but on a larger, more systemic scale. Using the analytical skills she honed in the corporate bunker, she begins quietly compiling data. She is Elena Thorne, billionaire's wife here. She is Elena Mendez, who speaks the language and understands the fear. People talk to her. She uncovers a human trafficking ring operating under the guise of legitimate employment agencies, preying on undocumented immigrants. The mastermind is not a lone coyote, but a sophisticated operation with ties to a shell company that has done business with Thorn Global's logistics division. The corruption has touched his empire. This is the final, surprising twist. The threat isn't external anymore. It's woven into the very fabric of the world Alexander controls. Elena's past and his present are about to collide in the most dangerous way possible. She brings the evidence to Alexander. He is horrified. His company, however indirectly, is implicated in the suffering of people like the woman he loves. This is no longer a personal battle. It's a moral reckoning for his entire life's work. They face a choice: bury the information to protect the stock price and his legacy, or expose it, triggering massive scandal, lawsuits, and potential ruin. The old Alexander would have contained it. The man Elena has helped remake makes a different call. He uses his resources not to hide, but to attack. He directs his legal and security teams to work with federal investigators, providing full transparency. He publicly severs all ties with the implicated contractors and establishes a massive restitution fund for the victims, financed by his personal wealth. The stock of Thorn Global plummets. The board is in open revolt. Elena Thorn watches as the legacy she preserved is set on fire by her son's conscience. But in the conflagration, something unexpected happens. Public opinion, after initial shock, turns. Thorn Global is praised for its unprecedented transparency and accountability. Whistleblower protections are strengthened. Elena's role, though kept private, gives the action a powerful authenticity. Within a year, the company's value not only recovers, but exceeds its previous heights, buoyed by a new reputation for ethical leadership. The crisis forges their final, unbreakable bond. They fought side by side not for survival, but for justice. The power balance finally levels. He saved her from a coyote, she saved his soul from his own empire. 1 year to the day after she moved out, Alexander arrives at her Brooklyn apartment. He doesn't have a ring, he has a set of architectural blueprints for a house, not a mansion but a home. A joint project with rooms for her mother, a studio for her work, a music room for him, and a guest room for Leo. "I want to build this with you," he says, "as partners, from the foundation up." She says yes. The documentary ends not at a wedding, but at a naturalization ceremony. Elena Mendez, having fulfilled all the requirements on her own merit, stands to take the oath of allegiance. In the front row sits Alexander Thorn, beaming with a pride that has nothing to do with ownership. Her mother is beside him, healthy, crying happy tears. As the judge speaks, Elena's hand goes to the simple gold band on her finger, a real symbol of a real choice. She is not Elena Thorn, the billionaire's wife. She is Elena Mendez Thorn, citizen, advocate, partner. She did not marry for a green card. She married for love, but only after she first married herself. The whisper in the dark led not to a rescue, but to a revolution of two people brave enough to dismantle the fantasy and build something true in its place. The fairy tale was a lie, but the truth they built is so much better. So what is the true anatomy of this modern fairy tale? It begins with a fundamental human longing, the fantasy of being chosen, of being seen in our most vulnerable state and deemed worthy of rescue. It's a narrative encoded in our culture, from Cinderella to Pretty Woman, promising that love can transcend the brutal mathematics of class and power. But as our deep dive reveals, the fantasy is a dangerous simplification. Real power imbalances don't dissolve with a kiss, they mutate. The rescue becomes control. The sanctuary becomes a gilded cage. The vulnerable party doesn't just gain a protector, they risk losing their very identity in the process of assimilation. And the powerful party isn't a savior, they're often a prisoner of their own fortress, using the transaction to hide their own fragilities. The enduring appeal of the Whisper in the Dark story isn't about romance, it's about agency. It's the fantasy that our deepest desperation, our most humiliating moment, could instead become our greatest strength, the key that unlocks a better world. The truth is more complex and more powerful. Agency isn't given in a moment of rescue. It is taken, piece by piece, through the painful, unglamorous work of setting boundaries, reclaiming identity, and demanding to be loved as an equal, not a subject. Elena and Alexander's story didn't succeed because he was rich and she was pretty. It succeeded because they were both brave enough to burn the original contract, the one on paper and the unwritten one in their heads. They chose to build something authentic on the ashes of a convenient lie. Their happy ending wasn't the marriage, it was the renegotiation. This leaves us with one lingering, uncomfortable question. In our own lives, in relationships with less dramatic power disparities, the imbalance of income, of social capital, of emotional dependence, how many of us are living inside unexamined contracts? How many of us are performing a role, slowly disappearing, for the sake of security or love? And do we have the courage to renegotiate? These stories captivate us because they are mirrors, however distorted. They show us the seduction of the easy rescue and the harder, more beautiful prize of building a partnership where both people are free. The next time you hear a whisper in the dark, remember, the real magic doesn't happen when someone leans in to listen. It happens when you find your own voice and choose who gets to hear it. If you found this exploration of power, love, and identity compelling, make sure to subscribe. We deconstruct the narratives that shape our world, one viral story at a time. Thanks for watching.